Imagine walking into a house where the lamps are made of human skin, where the bowls are skulls, where the chairs are upholstered with flesh, and where, hanging on the wall, are masks made from the faces of dead women. That's not a movie scene. It's not the Texas Chain Saw Massacre. That was real. In that house lived a man, quiet, reserved, with a blank stare. A kind neighbor who greeted you at church, and who, at night, dug graves to build his own museum of death. His name was Ed Gein, and when the police entered his farm, they found something that not even hell would have accepted. Skin turned into art, bodies turned into furniture, and an obsession so sick that it transformed his love for his mother into the most macabre cult ever seen. This isn't a fictional monster. It's not a story invented by Hollywood. It's the true story the world tried to forget. The origin of horror. There was a place called Plainfield, Wisconsin, quiet and frozen, where no one suspected that behind that farm lived someone capable of defying death itself. There, Edward Theodore Ed Gein was born, the man few truly know and whose actions inspired the most iconic horror films. But behind the monster that culture remembers, there is a child, a mother, a silence, and hidden traces that almost no one tells. Ed Gein was born on August 27, 1906, the son of Augusta and George Gein. He grew up on a rural, isolated property with few outside visitors. His father was an alcoholic with violent tendencies, and his mother, Augusta, was a woman of strict, fervently religious faith who condemned any expression of sexuality or desire. Augusta raised her children with Puritan doctrine. She forbade all impure behavior, encouraged the shameful taboo of female sex, and fostered the fear of sin within the home. Augusta forced Ed to watch scenes of divine punishment, kept him away from friends, prevented him from having girlfriends. She became his entire world. Ed attended classes occasionally. According to school reports, he was a quiet, strange child, often smiling for no apparent reason. The psychological pressure grew over the years. Ed began to dream about the body, death, and experiencing morbidity with bones and bodies. Dark fantasies grew in the darkness of his mind, fueled by loneliness, rigid doctrines, and at the same time inner obsessions. When his father died, alcoholism and abuse, and his brother was gone, the burden of the household fell entirely on Augusta and Ed. He took on farming and household chores. The more isolated he was, the more he immersed himself in his imagination. The farm, the corral, the nearby cemetery. His universe narrowed the boundaries between life and death. Ed lived in the back, in dark rooms, next to dead animals, odors, and decay. He learned to divide reality, to hide the impure, to maintain a facade. He also developed an obsession with death, with the corpse, with what remains beneath the earth. The inheritance of death. When Augusta died in 1945, Ed felt a loss the world didn't understand. She had been his world, his judge, his executioner. Without his mother, his inner universe cracked. He lost his moral compass. After her death, Ed sold or abandoned many of the house's old belongings, but left many pieces intact: photos, clothes, furniture. He kept his mother's room exactly as she had left it, pristine, untouched. It was his eternal sanctuary. That room functioned as an icon, as a living memory. It was the uncorrupted mother, the center of the world he no longer had. In his mind, what didn't change was sacred. That mental sanctuary was the core of his madness. Many researchers attribute Ed's search for a reunion with his mother in a macabre sense, projecting her figure onto other bodies, onto skin, onto masks, collecting parts to symbolically reconstruct it. Soon he began visiting nearby cemeteries on dark nights during moonlit times. He went deep inside, unearthing recent coffins bearing the marks of middle-aged women, exhuming bodies. He brought remains back to his farm. The underlying experiments weren't just necrophilia, but a search for meaning. Touching what is dead, manipulating death into life. As he himself put it, when he exhumed, he knew bodies, saw faces, remembered that mother's chamber. He said that under a trance he returned with pieces that he assembled with anatomical knowledge. It is said that at certain moments Ed would enter a trance, as if a strange force were guiding him, that he didn't clearly remember some exhumations, that his mind fluctuated between lucidity and unconsciousness. That ambivalence was key. It made him unpredictable, difficult to judge clearly. For many, Netflix or TV series relativize those stages. They don't always show what Ed experienced during those episodes, the emptiness, the fear, the double consciousness. But those dark moments are the cracks in the mask. During those years of serious silent theft, approximately between 1947 and 1952, Ed visited graves up to 40 times, according to his own account. In some cases, he returned with remains, in others, not. Sometimes he didn't remember how he opened the coffin. Other times, he did it in minutes. He acknowledged that he selected women whose figures reminded him of his mother. Fragments found in his home later revealed female skin masks, shrouds, and objects made from body parts. But even these early finds don't fully explain the internal psychological mechanism. One of the theories, little explored publicly, is that Ed read macabre literature, pulp magazines depicting violence, death, and dismembered bodies, comparing them to his inner obsessions. He was also exposed to news of war atrocities, World War II crimes, and cases of artistic corpses, elements that fueled his morbid imagination. That literary and symbolic dimension is often left out in dramatizations that only show the physical horror, but not the mental context. Before the crime that finally exposed him, Ed was involved in local disappearances. One of them was Mary Hogan, who disappeared in 1954. Although he was never formally convicted of that crime, he admitted his involvement in subsequent interviews. Mary Hogan was a tavern keeper. Her body was never found, but her face, inside Ed's house, was found. A mask of her face, a partial skull. That episode left clues. The use of masks, the removal of faces, objects made from human skin. It was a silent escalation toward what would later become his great crime, Bernice Worden. In November 1957, the case exploded. Bernice Worden owned a hardware store in Plainfield. The record shows that one morning, his car left the store but never returned. Police found his truck backing out, blood in the store, and the register open. The next morning, his body was found inside a shed on Ed's property, hanging upside down, mutilated, partially naked, and with post-mortem wounds suggestive of ritualism. The discovery sparked the investigation into Ed Gein, which until then had been merely a macabre rumor. When officers entered his farm, what they discovered was beyond belief. Chairs covered with human skin, masks, skulls on bedposts, lamps covered with human facial skin, containers made from skulls, and women's remains. Gein confessed to exhuming 9 women's graves and admitted to those crimes. He said that between 1947 and 1952, he had performed many exhumations, but he didn't always remember the details. Although he was only formally convicted of the murder of Bernice Worden, his fame for the horrors he uncovered made him a black legend of American crime. What Netflix or dramatizations often soften is the symbolic aspect. That Ed constructed a simulacrum of his mother inside his mind, that the masks were attempts to adopt the maternal figure, that the objects were perverse devotional relics, that he didn't just kill bodies, he killed memories, that some remains weren't functional as objects, masks, windshields, furniture. They were symbols of an obsession that doesn't easily translate on screen. Ed Gein wasn't discovered by a brilliant lead or a shrewd detective. It was the brutal disappearance of an ordinary woman that shattered his secret world. But by then, the monster was already carved from bone, skin, and flesh. The House of Horrors existed. The masks were ready. All that was missing was for the world to see them. And when the world saw them, the name Ed Gein came to symbolize evil in its most subtle form, willful cruelty, internal horror. But there are still pieces of the puzzle missing, much more that Netflix hasn't shown, much more they don't want to tell. The House of Horror and the Hidden Truth. Plainfield, Wisconsin, woke up shrouded in fog on November 17, 1957. The air was thick, icy, heavy, as if winter itself had decided to stay and watch what was going to happen. At the small-town hardware store, Bernice Warden didn't open the door as she did every morning. The door was ajar. The counter was stained, and in the logbook one last entry written with a firm hand, Ed Gein, gallon of antifreeze. That simple line was the thread that lifted the darkest veil in American criminal history. The discovery officers arrived at Gein's house at dusk, a lonely, silent property surrounded by frozen fields and dead trees. The wind was cutting, the flashlights barely illuminating the dirt road. The barn door creaked. The smell was unbearable. One of the officers, Deputy Sheriff Schley, took a few steps forward. When he turned on his flashlight inside the shed, the light hit something that took seconds for his brain to process. A body hung from the ceiling, upside down, sliced open. It was Bernice Warden, mutilated, decapitated, her torso hollowed out, her feet bound with rope. The officers retreated amid screams, nausea, and silence. Hell had opened in Wisconsin. Inside the house, what they found defied all logic. Human skin masks hung like trophies, bowls made from skulls, leather-upholstered chairs, belts made from nipples, a box of organs, and in a brown paper bag, the flayed face of Mary Hogan, the woman who had disappeared 3 years earlier. The monster everyone thought couldn't exist, did exist, and his name was Ed Gein. The arrest. That same night, the police located him at a neighbor's house. He was calm, not running away, not nervous, as if nothing had happened. When they arrested him, he asked in a calm voice, "Is Bernice at the farm?" It was the remark of a man who didn't fully understand what he had done, or who pretended not to. At the station during interrogation, Ed spoke without emotion. He said he didn't remember killing Bernice, that his vision had just gotten blurred, and that many of the things found in his house weren't from murders, but from graves he had visited. He confessed to exhuming freshly buried bodies. He described how he opened coffins with a crowbar, how he cut off body parts, how he preserved them. But his tone was that of someone talking about a routine, not a crime. When the officers asked him why he did it, he responded with a phrase that chilled the blood. "I wanted to feel close to Mom." The revelations. In the following days, the farm was surrounded. Reporters arrived from all over the country. The story was so disturbing that even the most sensationalist media outlets didn't know how to tell it without causing collective nightmares. In the press, he was called the Plainfield Butcher, the monster of the Midwest, the man in the masks. But behind the media hype, there was something that was never fully explained. Ed Gein was not a traditional serial killer. Only 2 proven murders were attributed to him, Mary Hogan and Bernice Warden. And yet, the magnitude of his acts surpassed in horror almost any other criminal of the time. What distinguished him was not the number, but the purpose. Gein didn't kill for pleasure, revenge, or power. He killed and dug up to recreate a world he had lost. Psychiatrists would later define him as an extreme case of paranoid schizophrenia with dissociative psychosis. But that doesn't explain the essential point. What Gein sought was to reconstruct his mother. He believed he could wear her skin, or at least feel her presence. During the searches, investigators found what would later be known as the woman suit, or the mum suit, a complete body made of female skin with carved breasts, face, and genitals. A literal attempt to become Augusta Gein. When shown it, Ed smiled slightly and said, "I just wanted to know what it felt like to be her." The truths Netflix left untold. Modern dramatizations often portray Gein as an out-of-control psychopath, an isolated madman who lost his mind in the countryside. But the truth is more uncomfortable. Ed Gein was a direct product of his environment, his religion, and his times. Plainfield was a conservative, puritanical place with rigid beliefs about the body and death. Funerals were intimate affairs. Women were portrayed as saints or sinners. There was no middle ground. And his mother, Augusta, reinforced each of these ideas to the extreme. She taught him that women were the source of all sin, that the flesh was impure, that desire was a curse, and yet she loved him in a sick, all-consuming, possessive way. That mixture of sexual repression, religious guilt, and loneliness led him to create a distorted view of the world. For Ed, flesh wasn't flesh. It was a symbol. It was memory. It was the raw material of his own universe. What few mention, and what adaptations often omit, is that Gein wasn't stupid. He knew how to read. He knew basic anatomy. He knew how to preserve human skin without it rotting. You don't learn that by accident. He had researched. He had experimented. He had planned. And what suggests something even more terrifying, that his actions weren't a whim, but a methodical project, hidden beneath years of silence. The monster's trial. The trial began in 1958. The Waushara County Courthouse was filled with onlookers, journalists, doctors, and witnesses. Ed Gein arrived handcuffed, his gaze lost, but always with that unsettling calm. He seemed absent, as if the courtroom didn't exist. His lawyer, William Belter, pleaded insanity. Psychiatrists confirmed the obvious. Ed lived in his own world. He believed his mother was still speaking to him, guiding him from beyond the grave. That each body he unearthed was an attempt to reconstruct her spirit. During the trial, the prosecutor presented the objects confiscated from the house. Not all of them were publicly displayed. The full list was too graphic. Among them were 4 human noses in a box, a lamp with skin, 2 lips sewn to a blind cord, a corset made of female skin, masks with perfectly preserved features. The description caused those present to faint. A woman screamed in the middle of the hearing. The judge interrupted the session. The press turned the trial into a media circus. But what wasn't shown on the news, and Netflix doesn't cover it, is the details of the makeshift laboratory Ed maintained. Alongside the artifacts were notebooks, sketches, anatomical drawings, diagrams of human skin, sewing diagrams, notes on body measurements. It was a meticulous archive, not the work of a blind madman, but of a man obsessed with precision. Ed wasn't a clumsy killer. He was a craftsman of horror. The verdict. On November 21, 1958, the judge found him not guilty by reason of insanity. He was admitted to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Waupun, Wisconsin. He spent the rest of his life there. But the story didn't end with his confinement. For the first few weeks, Ed adjusted to the hospital with surprising ease. He helped in the kitchen, read comics, and played chess. He responded politely. He never showed anger or guilt. And when asked about his crimes, he responded with ambiguous phrases. It wasn't as bad as they say. Some of those bodies were already dead. One of the psychiatrists who interviewed him for years stated, Ed Gein feels no guilt because he never understood that he did anything wrong. For him, the body wasn't sacred, it was just work material. That was the true essence of the case, absolute dehumanization. Gein didn't hate, he didn't love, he just observed, he dissected, he reused. The hidden legacy. Ed Gein died on July 26, 1984, at the age of 77, at the Mendota Psychiatric Hospital. His cause of death was lung cancer. His funeral was discreet, guarded, with a sealed coffin. Years later, his grave was vandalized and part of the tombstone stolen, as if death couldn't hold him back either. But his shadow extended beyond the Plainfield countryside. He inspired Norman Bates in Psycho, 1960, Leatherface in the Texas Chain Saw Massacre, 1974, and Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, 1991. Three of cinema's most iconic killers, all born from the echo of a single man. However, those films omitted a crucial truth, that Ed Gein was not the classic villain who enjoys killing. It was something much more disturbing, a man who believed he was doing something natural. In his mind, the line between life and death didn't exist. The bodies were empty vessels, and maternal love, an eternal voice, urged him from beyond the grave. When psychiatrists asked him what he felt wearing the skin masks, he replied with chilling calm, "I just wanted to look pretty for Mom." The silence of Plainfield. After his arrest, Plainfield changed forever. The town, once a symbol of rural peace, became synonymous with horror. The houses closed up. People stopped talking. Children grew up afraid of cold nights. In 1958, the Gein farm was put up for auction. But before it could be sold, it burned in a mysterious fire. The flames devoured everything. Some say it was an accident. Others, it was revenge. But the residents knew the truth. Plainfield wanted no more ghosts. The land was cleared, but the stigma remained. To this day, many avoid passing by the site where the house once stood. They say that sometimes, on moonless nights, you can see a faint light moving through the trees, like a flashlight searching for something or someone. The mirror of horror. The story of Ed Gein is the story of a mind that crossed the boundaries of humanity and never returned. But it's also a mirror, a reflection on how isolation, guilt, and repression can destroy a man's soul. Netflix, Hollywood, and horror movies only show the leather furniture, the corpses, the masks. But the most terrifying truth isn't in his house, but in what created it. A sick family system, a blind society, a warped faith, and a man who confused love with possession and death with salvation. Deep down, Ed Gein didn't want to kill. He wanted to rebuild. And in that attempt to bring back to life what he loved, he destroyed everything he touched.